Hi, I'm Ryan Hyland. I'm the town manager for the town of Silverthorne, and I'm joined today by Assistant Town Manager Mark Leidal.
Hi.
And Senior Planner Lina Lesmes.
Hi.
Thanks for coming on the show today. We want to talk a little bit about an upcoming process that we're going through in the town of Silverthorne with rezoning for our town core. But I think before we get into that specific effort, there's a lot of backstory, a lot of history on all of the public processes that have kind of led us to this point. So we'll walk everybody through some of that history before we jump into rezoning. But like I said, we've got a lot of public workshops, policies that have been adopted since really 2008, kind of in the modern era of talking about our downtown and zoning. So Mark, maybe you could walk us through a little bit of what's gotten us to this point, and then we'll jump into rezoning in a little bit.
Sure. We've spent quite a bit of time sort of dealing with our comprehensive plan through the years. Obviously, we've always had a comprehensive plan, but I think in 2008 was probably the first time that we started to really look at the town being a long lineal community to really wanting to focus in on our town core area. So in 2008, we did sort of discover that town core area and wanted to focus in on that, and what led us to some district design standards that we'll be talking about. But then as we went through a lot of the public processes moving forward from there, even into our 2014 comprehensive plan update, that's where the public really demanded that we start to see what happens within that town core. Mm-hmm. And so we really wanted to put an emphasis on that area. And so we've adopted a lot of policies and regulations that we put into place to say, what's the next step? How is that town core going to become a reality? And so with that comprehensive plan, those policies are taking us into the next direction, which is to lead us into district design standards and then ultimately this rezoning effort.
Right, and so even one step before we went through that 2014 comprehensive plan process, we had Downtown Colorado Inc. come into town mm-hmm. and kind of really crystallize what everybody was feeling the opportunity was there with 4th Street and that whole vision. And like you mentioned, I think in a lot of our community surveys and the demand was growing over the years. I think in 2011 was when we saw development of a downtown for Silverthorne was the #1 concern that people had when they were asked to list the top 3 concerns for the town. So that really drove council to look at those policies and figure out, okay, how can we foster changing the dynamics of that downtown area?
Well, I think with that town core or the downtown area, we certainly want to see a pedestrian friendly downtown area where we have a wonderful Blue River that passes right through that area. Mm-hmm. We wanted the pedestrian shops that could feed off of that, restaurants, retail, to create some of that pedestrian activity. So I think that's what everybody wanted to be able to see coming from a lot of the amenities that we already have in place. We already have a rec center. The pavilion is right in the core area of town. The Blue River runs right through the middle of it. So to be able to have that pedestrian-friendly community is what people have been looking for. So that's what led us to that comprehensive plan update and through a pretty extensive public process to make sure that people were on board with where we were headed.
Right.
Does it benefit everybody to know where we're talking about physically?
Sure, we're saying the town core, we say downtown sometimes, but really I think we can put a map up there. But yeah, Lina, walk us through what we're referring to when we talk about the town core.
So the area we're talking about begins at the outlets, the Blue Village of the outlets, and runs north along the highway, both sides of the highway, up to 6th Street, which is where CarQuest, the intersection with CarQuest. And then it on the east side of Highway 9, it goes to Rainbow Drive, and on the west side, portions of Adams and portions of Bryan. Okay. So
and that really kind of mirrors, the town core kind of mirrors the Urban Renewal Authority, which is another policy and another tool that was implemented a few years ago. So those kind of overlay each other. And then what we'll talk about after the break is kind of a new zone district that's a little even tighter than just the town core and specifically looking at a few blocks. But I think a lot of thought, a lot of public input has gone into what that area would like to look and feel, the things that you'd like to see there. And so after we went through that comprehensive plan process, then one of the next steps was design standards. And so I think at that point the town council said, okay, we know what people are feeling they'd like to see there, but what specifically do we want that to look like? So Lina, walk us through a little bit of how that process went leading up into adoption of those standards this year.
Sure. So as you mentioned, the comprehensive plan was adopted in May of 2014. And after that, one of the recommendations for implementation was taking a look at the standards that we have in place to sort of see how they need to be updated to be in line with that vision. And so the first step was taking a look at the design district standards, which we had in place but needed to be updated. And so as by a recommendation by the mayor sort of spearheaded this effort. We convened a committee of subcommittee of our EDAC, Economic Development Committee. And we got together monthly and really dove into what these standards said, the actual wording, what we want to see, how we need to update them. And so that was the first step, and that was completed in February of this year. So now we have in place design standards for the town core that we feel really capture what was talked about with the update of the comp plan.
Right, and so some of those design standards really crystallize that vision, and they say specifically, we'd like to see two-story buildings, we'd like to see you build out to closer to the curb.
Right.
Really things that are aimed at more of a traditional downtown landscape.
Exactly.
And I think Angry James Brewery is probably one of the first test cases that came under those new design standards. We can put one of those graphics up, and I think that's a pretty good illustration of the type of site plan and aesthetic that is called for in those standards.
Yeah, exactly. So they are proposing a two-story building, quality building materials. Of course, the use is exactly what we want to see, a restaurant type amenity with second-story residential, parking in the rear, building up to the street. So yeah, they were pretty much exactly what we were looking for.
Yeah, and a lot of different pieces coming together on that. That will probably be one of the first curb gutter and sidewalk and on-street parking opportunities, which is also called for in that comprehensive plan and some of those design standards. Then I think, go ahead.
I was going to say, you need a sidewalk to be
You
able
need
to.
a sidewalk. That's a kind of a foundation for a pedestrian-friendly, vibrant downtown.
And I think that's one of the things we looked at through the town core is, and we certainly want it for pedestrian-friendly. You got to have sidewalks. We're one of the only areas that does not have on-street parking, so we wanted to make sure that we get on-street parking within that town core, so that you can walk to those businesses or have access right in front of the businesses that are there. But we also wanted to establish more density, having additional building heights, having building sort of lot line to lot line, pulling the buildings right out to the street. So in creating that downtown or town core type of pedestrian friendly image, you definitely want to make sure that you've got some of that additional density pulling those buildings together, because having parking lots and in between buildings just doesn't work.
Yeah, and so another example that's coming up, the council will be, and the planning commission will be reviewing this shortly, but the performing arts center that the town will be building is being built to those new design standards as well. You mentioned parking a lot of times is out in front of a building, and we're pulling that out to the street to give that downtown feel. So I think those are probably two of the first examples of what those new design standards can bring.
Right.
So then we get to zoning. Those were both uses that are what the community is looking for, I think. And so those are, kind of smooth cases from a design perspective and from a zoning perspective. But when we come back in a minute, we'll talk about rezoning and what that looks like for the town core, downtown area, and what the types of uses folks are looking for and what they're not looking for in that area.